Hello, I'm Gus Downing, publisher and editor of the D&D Daily, and this is the LP News Network. We're here today with Joe LaRocca, NRF VP Loss Prevention from 2005 to 2012, Senior Advisor Loss Prevention RetaiLPartners, and Rich Mellor, NRF VP LP 2012 to 2014, former chairperson for the NRF LP Council, and a former VP of Loss Prevention in the industry, and now retired. Ladies and gentlemen, for well over 25 years, the NRF's LP Council, comprised of over 40 senior loss prevention and asset protection executives, has been focused on elevating, developing, and inspiring this industry. And while the faces have changed from generation to generation, their mission and commitment has never altered. If anything, it's gotten stronger, which is reflected in the growth and attendance of their signature event, the NRF Protect Conference. In 1984, the first time I attended one, there were around 400 attendees. And this past year, it was around 3,000. That's a 650% growth in 34 years, or 19% growth per year, which is a number every retailer would love to see. And as everyone knows, growth, and especially at 19% a year, is a direct reflection of the product it delivers and the leadership that drives it, with the main, most visible product being the Protect Conference and its sub-entities within it, such as the content sessions, the educational value it drives, the industry recognition and awards, the focus on legislation and ORC, and the importance it places on diversity and women in loss prevention. An interesting point that goes by virtually unnoticed is that we didn't have a subject matter expert leading the charge inside the NRF until 2005, when they hired Joe LaRocca. Up until then, there were great support and great folks in these jobs, but we didn't have that depth of representation. Joe really was the first SME, subject matter expert, that defined and became, to use the NRF's phrase, the voice of retail loss prevention. He blazed the trail and, quite frankly, started the national drive and awareness of the ORC effort, along with a host of other initiatives. Joe did an incredible job for 6 years that he led the effort, and Rich Mellor, named in 2011, and he continued to build it, polish it, and refine the model, which kept fueling its 19% a year growth until he decided to retire in 2014. At which time, Bob Maraca, another industry SME, became the vice president and immediately expanded the council, made it more inclusive, expanded the collaborative effort, and broadened the retail verticals engagement, which has been a Herculean effort given the fast growth and the expectations of the industry itself. So for the last 13 years, ladies and gentlemen, the NRF has had some great leadership, and supporting them is the council itself and the chairperson leading the group. They've had some great people on the council over the years and some fantastic chairs helping lead them. But today's session is about the NRF leadership itself and how we got here today to have the largest trade association loss prevention and asset protection effort in North America, and ask them where they think the industry is going. Joe and Rich, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Gus. Thank you for the opportunity.
You know, Joe, you were the first SME here for the NRF VP of Loss Prevention in 2005. You know, what did you walk into, and can you tell us a little bit about the first 5 years?
Well, Gus, thanks for having us, and thanks for the recognition for the council.
Oh, absolutely.
And for the former chairs. You know, loss prevention is not an individual sport. This is a team sport. And I was fortunate in my career to have the opportunity to present at the NRF conference, then to join the advisory council at the invitation of Mike Keenan, and then ultimately go to work for them. As you mentioned, joining the NRF, I really joined an organization full of experts at government relations, experts at public relations, experts at human resources, and a number of retail disciplines. And they certainly understood loss prevention. Dan Butler, who had spent many years working on the operational aspects and loss prevention aspects of the conferences and the industry, understood the problems. But the NRF needed to go just another layer deep. And that's hopefully the experience I've brought to the overall industry. I thought it would be interesting, just for history's sake, to tell you a little bit about my first 3 weeks on the job,
Sure.
Because it's representative of what I think every VP of loss prevention has experienced along the way. So I started the 3rd of January in 2005. I moved over the Christmas holidays into DC, and my very first week at the NRF, I was indoctrinated into the culture, and I already met a number of different people. And a few days in, the New York Times was reporting about the holiday season and how retailers implemented these new Big Brother monitoring systems to crush the consumers at the register and the returns that they were making, and how retailers were blanketly denying returns for customers, making it far difficult to return any goods to the store. Now, NRF had heard this before because under a program by the Retail Exchange, or the Return Exchange, sorry, later the Retail Equation, and now with APRIS, nobody really understood the whole problem. So having a retailer with loss prevention experience, with a problem with returns, explaining this was a real challenge, the wardrobing or closeting issue, and then the people stealing and returning merchandise, the media needed to hear the story. Now, I can't say we fixed the problem in a few stories the first week, but over the years that followed, return management is now considered something very normal within the industry. There's not a negative aspect to it. In fact, it's a consumer savings, a consumer protection, if you will. Mm-hmm. Week 2 was the annual conference, the big show. So I was here in New York, and it was my privilege, not my nomination, but my privilege to honor Rich Mellor with the Silver Plaque Award, the first loss prevention person in the history of the program to receive the Silver Plaque, one of the industry's marquee awards you can win in the business. So
I remember that.
That was my very first conference and with the NRF, so thrilled to be here. Tell you lots of fun stories about Rich. No, I won't go there. My third week, on that Monday, the New York Times broke a story about a major department store that had a racial profiling suit put out against them. The press person comes in and says, need you to do some interviews. You'll be on Good Morning America, The Today Show, The New York Times. And understand I spent 9 years with Disney, and we were never allowed to go in front of the camera. So a very big culture shift, if you will. But as you can see, really the trails to be blazed through the ORC efforts, e-fencing, the emergency management. Shortly after joining, we did a lot of work with Homeland Security, and then we had Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma hit the Southeast. In the organized retail crime space, people like Dan Faculty, Kathleen Smith, John Talamo, Paul Jones, and the big box stores were all talking about ORC. And I think through the council, we were able to bring a coherent message to it. I'll never forget the conversation with Brad Brecky when he talked about e-fencing and the challenge that retailers were experiencing. And we coined that term and made it a national mission to have everybody understand ORC and also the fencing or the e-fencing operations that were taking place. It's how the whole battle with eBay and the online resellers and secondary marketplaces started. But really there was a lot of major accomplishments that we're always going to deal with crime and crisis. That's just the nature of our business. I think what made the job special was working with the council, leaders of leaders, if you will. Best known probably for the conferences and their planning efforts, but as you mentioned, a number of other programs. Developing the National Active Shooter Program, hand in hand with the ICSC, the International Council of Shopping Centers, and with the Department of Homeland Security and law enforcement agencies from around the country. Looking at the FEMA and the program working with the National Infrastructure Coordination Center, or the Commercial Facilities Sector Coordinating Council, terms that most people don't know, don't care, they've just never heard of them. But I can assure you that the talented people in the LP Advisory Council were working with government officials to look at response protocols in the event of a major crisis. The other things that we did along the way, we had a lot of fun. Planning the conference, recognizing our peers in the industry, recognizing the volunteers, recognizing the people that go above and beyond. And there's been a number of offshoots as a result. We now have ORC legislation in 30 states around the country. This program didn't exist back then. We've really opened a number of different avenues, and the council's been instrumental in the D&D and evolving this overall program. And a lot of that goes back, Rich was the very first advisory council chair I worked with, followed by Dan Doyle. Excited to work hand in hand with other leaders, and most loss prevention people don't get that opportunity. So I was thrilled, and I know Rich has a number of programs and accomplishments after I left, and he assumed the program.
So that takes us to you, Rich. I mean, you took over from Joe in 2011, 12, and was there for a couple of years. I mean, rough shoes to follow. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced, and having been in retail all your career, and what did you see transitioning to the position, and how did you move the ball forward?
Sure, I'd be glad to talk about it. First of all, let me acknowledge my partner here. It was a happy day when Joe joined the NRF, and I was the council chair, as he mentioned, and being able to work with him prior to him joining the NRF. Some of the sessions that he put together and presented at the NRF conference, I was the moderator of those sessions, so I knew there was a bright star coming, and pretty happy the day that he joined the NRF, especially being the council chair at that point, that I had a partner that really knew what was happening in the industry and what we needed to do to move the ball forward, as you mentioned. So some of the experiences were very similar for me as I started into the role at the NRF. You're immediately confronted with hot issues, and like Joe, I had never been in front of the camera before, but you have to get prepped and ready to go, and suddenly you're giving testimony at various different organizations that you frankly feel a little threatened by and a little intimidated. To name a few, the U.S. Commission on Human Relations, the EEOC, the Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Commerce. A hot issue for me at that time, and needed to get boned up really quick, was all of the conversation centering around ban the box. The EEOC had just put in place new guidelines that by the retailers they felt intimidated by, restricted on doing background checks and being able to ask those critical questions, whether or not you've been arrested and what for and so forth. And that whole ban the box terminology was like a shock wave going across the retail community. What are we going to need to do different? How are we going to be able to do our jobs, particularly in loss prevention, but even the Human Relations Department and Human Resources Department, being intimidated by the fact that if we don't do this right, the EEOC is going to make life miserable. So many retailers opted to just dispense with doing background checks for fear of the fact that they couldn't do it right. They wouldn't be able to execute it properly. So our challenge at the NRF was to put all of that in perspective and see if we couldn't establish something like a roadmap for them to be able to do and to still be able to get the job done, because as you know, it's a critical issue having criminals work in your workplace, whatever the criminal behavior might have been. It might be sexual predators, it might be fraudsters and other types of violent crimes. So it was still necessary to do those background checks, but how do you do them properly? So over the course of about a year, it was many of those opportunities to get in front of a camera, talk about it, particularly with these organizations that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and testify in front of the, the U.S. commissions and so forth. Not exactly a comfortable situation when you have an alternative point of view that you're going to go in and talk to the commissioners about. So that consumed a good part of the first year, and like Joe, kind of feeling like, what did I get myself into? And carrying the ball. I often deferred to him because he was still available to me, and he was a good resource and a good counselor for me on what to do and how to do it. So I thank him for that. He was a good guidepost for me in that first year. Naturally, ORC was still an issue, and we continued to work on that at the LP conferences. So many of the conference speakers had to do with how do you do the right thing in your workplace, legal opinions and so forth, having to do with background checks, and then attacking the ORC problem.
And I mentioned that loss prevention is really a team sport, and I think outside of the council, there's so many different people involved in the overall programs that take place. The NRF Investigators Network program, which grew to thousands of individuals from companies across the country, or the Joint Organized Retail Crime Task Force with some of the leading members and non-members of the NRF coming together to talk about an issue, crime, that plagues all of us. And I think collaboratively, even with other trade associations, crime and crisis were the two issues where we were able to really transcend the communications and work with retailers to send a cohesive message. So the EEOC hearings, testifying in Congress, which I don't know about you, but there's nothing more terrifying than testifying in Congress. While it's well scripted and you know everything that's coming your way, that never would have gone as smooth as it did without a lot of work behind the scenes from retailers providing context to the message that was being portrayed. And I say all that because I think the message the council talks about often is we need to get people involved. We need engagement. We want people involved in committees. We want people to volunteer their time, maybe resources, but get involved. It doesn't necessarily need to be at the NRF conference. It might be with a committee. It could be with a state retail association. It could be with programs that are now across the country, the Organized Retail Crimes Associations, ORCA, Metro ORCA, Law ORCA, Cal ORCA, et cetera. There's so many ways to get involved. And no one person makes the whole effort. And I think in every group, committee, organization where one person is the only one leading the charge, everything tends to fall apart if that person leaves. And that's I think the beauty of the NRF organization is you've seen it transcend leaders, even internal structure to the overall organization. One of my friends, Ellen Davis, who coined the phrase Cyber Monday, is now head of the NRF Foundation and working closely with the LP group and the other operational aspects of the organization. People are going to move around, and so keeping those contacts and watching people move in the organization, no matter where someone goes, the leaders might bounce around from company to company, but they can still be engaged in the overall effort.
You guys have done an incredible job, and I want to commend you both.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for
having
effort.
us. Thanks, and Gus, thank you for all you do here at the
Absolutely.
D&D, the D&D Daily. So many meetings around the country. People say the D&D, whether it's looking for the latest news, looking for career opportunities, and that's certainly been a challenge over the last couple of years with people looking. That's the good work that brings us all together.
Thank you.
And so thank you.
Absolutely.
And if I could just
Sure.
add a little compliment there too. As we took on the role at the NRF, you bring with you experiences from your retail space, Joe and I both. But you go to work and do the best you can. You have to rely on the people that are out there to give you the type of information and talk about the problems, maybe some solutions to help you get the job done. So also, as the D&D Daily brought that kind of information forward, so we learn from reading what happens at other places and so forth,
Right.
and it gives us a talking point. So at the NRF, without the wisdom of those other players around the council, in the industry, here, you don't know what to talk about, you don't know how to script your message. So thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you. Well, that's it for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to thank you for watching. And until next time, let's keep them all safe out there.